Imagine you're living in a free country. Your property is your own. You work hard, save money, and don't trust the banks. You've seen them fail. So you keep your savings in the safest asset known to men, gold. 20 gold coins. American eagles. Liberty's face on each one. Legal tender. Earned honestly. Hidden under your floorboards. One morning, you open the newspaper. The headline screams in bold black letters, "The president has signed an order. You are now a criminal. Turn in your gold within 3 weeks or face a $10,000 fine, $200,000 in today's money. And 10 years in federal prison. 10 years for owning a piece of metal." Sounds like the Soviet Union. Nazi Germany. Fiction. It's not. This happened in the United States of America. The land of the free. In 1933. This is the story of Executive Order 6102, the greatest wealth transfer in American history. How the government used crisis to seize citizen wealth. How one man decided that to save the economy, he had to break the promise of money itself. The year is 1933. America is on its knees. Stock market crashed. Factories silent. 1 in 4 men unemployed. People starving in the streets. Bread lines in Times Square stretch for blocks. But the real crisis wasn't in the factories. It was in the banks. The American banking system was collapsing. People watched local banks close their doors and vanish with life savings. Panic is contagious. When your neighbor loses his money, you run to your bank demanding cash. But the banks didn't have it. They'd lent it out. When everyone demanded money at once, the banks failed. By March 1933, 4,000 banks had collapsed. People stopped trusting paper. They wanted something real. They wanted gold. Under the gold standard, you could exchange a 20 bill for a 20 gold coin at any bank. This was the bedrock of the global economy. The government couldn't just print money whenever it wanted, it needed gold to back it up. But in 1933, this system was killing the economy. People hoarded gold, taking it from banks and hiding it in mattresses and gardens. Every coin that left meant bank reserves dropped. Lower reserves meant less lending. Less lending meant more business failures. More failures meant more panic and more hoarding. A death spiral. March 4, 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood on the Capitol steps in pouring rain. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But behind the brave words, Roosevelt was terrified. The banking system was hours from total annihilation. His first act, close the banks. A national bank holiday. For a week, no one could access their money. The country held its breath. Roosevelt and his advisors stared at the numbers. They needed to print money, flood the system with cash to restart the factories. But they couldn't. The gold standard stopped them. The law required 40 cents of gold for every dollar printed. And they didn't have enough gold, the people had hidden it all. Roosevelt was handcuffed by a shiny yellow metal. He had a choice: let the system fail and watch the country descend into anarchy, or break the rules. He chose to break the rules. He decided the gold in people's hands didn't belong to them. It belonged to the nation. April 5, 1933. Roosevelt sat at his desk in the Oval Office. He took his pen and signed Executive Order 6102. Forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. It sounded like a wartime measure. In a way, it was. Roosevelt believed he was fighting a war against the Depression. The order was simple and brutal. All citizens must surrender their gold to the government by May 1st. They'd receive paper money in exchange, 20.67 per ounce. But here's the catch: paper money wasn't gold. It was a promise. And promises can be broken. Many Americans were patriotic. They loved Roosevelt. They believed this was necessary to save the country. They lined up at banks with wedding gifts and grandfather's coins, handed over savings for paper dollars, believing they were doing their duty. But others were furious. They saw tyranny. Theft. Lawyers argued it was unconstitutional. The Fifth Amendment protects private property from seizure without just compensation. Was 20.67 just compensation? That was the question. Then there were those who simply refused. They didn't protest. They stayed quiet. Left the gold under floorboards. Buried it in backyards. Took the risk. The government knew many would hide their gold. So they unleashed treasury agents. They combed through bank records, looking for large gold withdrawals. They knocked on doors. They threatened prosecution. The government was treating its own citizens like smugglers. But why did Roosevelt really do it? Was it just to stop hoarding? No. There was a deeper, darker plan. A plan the average citizen didn't understand until too late. The confiscation wasn't the end. It was step one of a two-step heist. Step 1, get the gold. Take it from private hands, put it in government vaults. Step 2, the devaluation. Roosevelt wanted inflation. Prices were crashing, farmers couldn't sell corn, factories couldn't move cars. He believed if the dollar was worth less, prices would rise. The way to devalue the dollar? Raise the price of gold. But he couldn't raise gold's price while people still owned it. Think about it, if the government announced gold would double tomorrow, every owner would make massive profits. The government would be enriching the hoarders. Roosevelt didn't want to enrich them. He wanted the profit for the government. So he had to take the gold first. He waited until millions of ounces sat safely in the Federal Reserve. Then, January 1934, 9 months after confiscation, he made his move. Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act, giving the president power to set gold's price. The next day, Roosevelt signed a proclamation, gold price raised from $20.67 to $35 an ounce. Do the math. 69 increase. In the blink of an eye, the government vault's value jumped billions. The government made a massive bookkeeping profit. But the people who'd turned in their gold, they'd been paid 20. Now that same gold was worth 35. They'd been robbed. Effectively, the government stole 40 of wealth from everyone who obeyed the law. If you'd kept your gold, you'd be 40 richer. But because you trusted your government, you lost almost half your purchasing power. Brilliant. Ruthless. It allowed the government to print billions of new dollars backed by the higher gold value, flooding the economy with cash. Did it work? Economists still argue. Some say Roosevelt saved the economy, broke the deflationary spiral, enabled recovery. They call him a hero who did what had to be done. Others say it was a crime that destroyed private property in America. It taught the government they could change the rules whenever they wanted. Not everyone surrendered without a fight. People sued. Imagine you'd bought a railroad bond 10 years earlier. The contract explicitly said you'd be repaid in gold coin. These gold clauses were in millions of contracts, mortgages, bonds, insurance policies, specifically to protect against exactly what Roosevelt was doing. When Roosevelt devalued the dollar, these people demanded their gold. They went to court. A contract is a contract. You can't erase it with a pen. The cases went to the Supreme Court, the Gold Clause cases. The fate of the New Deal hung in the balance. If the court ruled against Roosevelt, the government would owe billions in unpayable debt. The economy might collapse again. Roosevelt was terrified. He prepared a speech defying the court if they ruled against him. He was ready to cause a constitutional crisis. The Supreme Court decided. 5-4, one of the closest calls in history. The court ruled for the government. But the reasoning was twisted. The judges admitted what the government did was technically unconstitutional. A breach of contract. Immoral. But they said the plaintiffs couldn't prove damages. They used a legal loophole to let the government off the hook. Justice McReynolds, dissenting, was so angry he threw his papers on the floor. He shouted from the bench, "This is Nero at his worst. The Constitution is gone." He believed the America of the Founding Fathers, of property rights and limited government, died that day. The government won. The gold was theirs. But now they had a physical problem. They'd collected so much gold they didn't know where to put it. Vaults in New York and Philadelphia were overflowing. Roosevelt worried about war. He looked at Europe, saw Hitler's rise. He worried New York could be bombed or invaded. He wanted a safe place, in the middle of the country, behind mountains. Impenetrable. He pointed to a military base in Kentucky, Fort Knox. In a mechanized cavalry unit stationed outside. Then the secret trains began. Armored trains moved across the country at night, loaded with melted-down savings of the American people. Millions of coins from farmers and shopkeepers melted into anonymous gold bars. Stacked in the Fort Knox vault. That's where the gold sits today. Or at least, that's where they tell us it sits. The confiscation changed the relationship between American citizens and their money forever. Before 1933, money was something you owned. A physical commodity with inherent value. After 1933, money was something the government allowed you to use. A symbol. A token. Its value depended entirely on trust in the state. But there's a final twist connecting directly to the money in your pocket today. When Roosevelt took the gold, he didn't just devalue the dollar. He broke the link. For 40 years, 1934 to 1974, it was illegal for Americans to own monetary gold. Think about that. For 4 decades, during the height of the Cold War, while America preached freedom and capitalism against communists, it was illegal for a free American to buy a gold bar. If you wanted to protect wealth from inflation, you had to buy real estate or stocks. You couldn't buy the metal. This forced Americans into the financial system, banks and the stock market. It built the modern financial industry. Not until 1974 did President Gerald Ford finally sign a law legalizing gold ownership. By then, the world had changed. The dollar was no longer backed by gold at all. Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. Gold was just a commodity, like copper or wheat. Not money anymore. But the memory of 1933 remains. A scar on America's financial psyche. It's why even today, whenever crisis hits, whenever banks look shaky, people rush to buy gold. They remember their grandparents' stories. They remember the headlines. They remember that when chips are down, the government will change the rules. But what if it happened again? We live in a world of digital money. Credit cards and apps. We rarely touch cash. The government is talking about a central bank digital currency, a programmable digital dollar they can track. Critics say a digital currency would be the ultimate Executive Order 6102. In 1933, they had to send agents to knock on doors. Messy. Difficult. With digital currency, they wouldn't have to knock. They could just press a button. They could freeze your account. Take a percentage of savings to pay national debt. Tell you your money expires if you don't spend it. The technology of confiscation has improved. The story of 1933 isn't just history. It's a warning. It teaches us that money isn't just economics. It's politics. It's power. When you hold a gold coin, you're holding independence. Something that doesn't rely on a politician's promise. That's why they hated it in 1933. And that's why they still fear it today. Roosevelt may have been a hero to many. He may have saved the system. But he did it by destroying the contract of trust. He taught us that in national emergencies, there are no rights, only interests. He showed us that the only wealth you truly own is the wealth you can hold in your hand and defend. As we look at today's debt mountains, at rising inflation numbers, we have to ask ourselves, if the crisis comes again, if the banks fail again, if the dollar collapses, what will the president do next time? Will there be another executive order? And this time, will you have anything left to confiscate? To really understand 1933's magnitude, we have to look at individual stories. The government order sounded terrifying, 10 years in prison, 10,000 fine. But did they actually enforce it? Did they actually throw people in jail for hoarding gold? Yes. But they were selective. They wanted to make an example. They needed a scapegoat to show they were serious. They found their target in New York City, Frederick Barber Campbell, a wealthy lawyer, exactly the kind of hoarder Roosevelt wanted to target. Campbell had 27 gold bars at Chase National Bank, about 5,000 ounces. In today's money, over 10 million. When the executive order was signed, the bank contacted Campbell. Under the new law, they were required to turn his gold over to the Federal Reserve. Campbell was a lawyer. He knew his rights. He marched into the bank, absolutely not. This gold is my private property. The executive order is illegal. Return my gold immediately so I can hide it. The bank refused. They were terrified of the government. So Campbell did something incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. He sued the bank. And he sued the United States government. He argued the government had no authority to seize property in peacetime. The Constitution protected him. The government struck back with full force. They didn't just fight his lawsuit. They indicted him. September 28, 1933, a federal grand jury indicted Frederick Campbell for failing to register his gold holdings. The first person in American history to face criminal charges for owning honest money. The case became a sensation. Individual versus state. But the government was clever. They knew if it went to a jury, Campbell might win. Average Americans might sympathize, decide the law was unjust. So just before trial, the government seized the gold anyway. Physically took it from the Chase vault. Then, in a bizarre legal twist, a judge ruled that because the gold was already seized, the criminal charges were moot. The indictment was dropped. Campbell lost his gold. But he stayed out of prison. The message was clear: you might not go to jail, but you will lose your wealth. The government will win. This sent a chill through America's wealthy elite. Compliance rates went up. People realized the game was rigged. While domestic gold was rounded up, there was another problem: foreign gold. The United States was part of a global financial system. Huge amounts of gold sat in American banks belonging to foreign citizens and governments. Roosevelt's order didn't just steal from Americans, it effectively defaulted on international obligations. This caused market chaos. The dollar crashed on foreign exchange. In London, bankers were furious. They called it bankruptcy. They said the United States was acting like a banana republic. By 1935, the U.S. Treasury had accumulated more gold than any entity in world history. Gold from the confiscation. Gold from mines. Gold flowing from Europe as people fled Hitler. They had a problem: physical space. They built the depository in Kentucky because it was militarily defensible, past the Appalachian Mountains, hard for enemy bombers to reach. Construction was done in total secrecy. The building isn't just a building. It's a bomb-proof bunker. Granite walls lined with concrete and steel. Bomb-proof roof. The vault door weighs 22 tons, so heavy no single person knows the combination. It requires multiple staff members dialing separate combinations to open it. But the real security was deception. The government wanted the world to know the gold was safe, so they released propaganda reels showing soldiers and tanks. But they never showed the gold. From the moment gold was moved in during the late 1930s, a curtain of silence fell. Very few people have ever been inside. Presidents have rarely visited. This secrecy bred conspiracy theories. And these theories aren't just internet madness. They're based on a very real question: is the gold actually there? The last full audit of Fort Knox gold was done in the 1950s. Since then, the government has refused a full physical inventory. Too expensive, they say. Too dangerous to move the bars. But critics ask a simple question: if you have $500 billion in assets, wouldn't you want to count it occasionally? In 1974, the rumors got so bad the government was forced to do a PR stunt. Congresswoman Mary Brooks had spread rumors the gold was gone, secretly sold to manipulate prices or pay for Vietnam. To silence her, the Treasury Secretary invited congressmen and 100 journalists to visit the vault. September 23, 1974. They opened the heavy door. Cameras flashed. Journalists peered inside. Saw stacks of gold bars. One congressman picked up a bar to feel the weight. Heavy. Looked real. But here's the catch: they only opened one compartment. Fort Knox has many compartments. They showed the press a tiny fraction of total holdings. Was it a real audit? Or a movie set? We still don't know. The confiscation did more than take metal. It changed the psychology of American investors. For 40 years, Americans were forced into paper assets: stocks, bonds, savings accounts. Great for Wall Street. If you can't buy gold, you buy stocks. This fueled massive growth of the American financial sector in the 20th century. But it also left Americans vulnerable to inflation. In the 1970s, the bill for Roosevelt's policies came due. By 1971, the United States had printed too much paper money. Under Bretton Woods, foreign countries could still exchange dollars for gold. France looked at U.S. spending, Vietnam War, Great Society programs, and did the math. America didn't have enough gold to back all the printed dollars. So France demanded their gold. They sent warships to New York to pick it up. President Nixon panicked. If he paid France, the vault would be empty. August 15, 1971, Nixon went on television. He announced he was closing the gold window. The dollar was no longer convertible into gold. This was the final death of the gold standard. The direct sequel to 1933. Roosevelt broke the link for citizens. Nixon broke the link for the world. The result? Inflation of the 1970s. The dollar lost half its value in a decade. Oil prices tripled. During this chaos, a movement began to legalize gold. The hero, Jim Blanchard, a firebrand from New Orleans who believed owning gold was a fundamental human right. He called the ban unconstitutional. He staged protests. He hired a biplane to fly over Nixon's inauguration with a banner, "Legalize Gold." He smuggled a gold bar into a press conference and held it up, daring police to arrest him. He embarrassed the government, pointing out the hypocrisy. How can America call itself the land of the free if you go to jail for owning a coin? His pressure worked. In 1974, President Ford signed the bill repealing the ban. December 31, 1974, Americans lined up at coin shops. For the first time in 41 years, they could legally buy gold. But by then, the damage was done. The culture had changed. Most Americans didn't care about gold anymore. They cared about the stock market and real estate. Gold had become a niche asset for survivalists and collectors. But look at today. We're living through a strange echo of the past. Central banks worldwide are buying gold at record pace: China, Russia, India, Turkey. They're loading up their vaults. Why? Because they know history. They know paper money has a lifespan. They know the US dollar, weaponized by sanctions, might not be the reserve currency forever. They're doing exactly what Roosevelt did in 1933, hoarding the real money while telling the public to trust the paper. And this brings us back to the most terrifying possibility: digital confiscation. We briefly mentioned central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. But we need to go deeper. In 1933, the government relied on voluntary compliance and fear. They couldn't search every house in America. But a CBDC is different. It's programmable money. Imagine the Federal Reserve issues a digital dollar directly to your smartphone app. No physical banks. Just the Fed. Now imagine a crisis hits. Inflation spikes to 20. People stop spending. The Fed decides to implement negative interest rates. They want to force you to spend. With a CBDC, they could simply program your money to decay. Every month you don't spend it, your balance goes down 1. Or imagine they decide buying gold is bad for the economy again. They could simply program the digital dollar to block any transaction at a coin shop. You try to buy gold, transaction declined. Not by a bank manager. By the code itself. It would be Executive Order 6102 without the executive order. It would be automatic. This is why the story of 1933 matters. It's not just about metal. It's about control. It's about the eternal struggle between the citizen who wants to save the fruits of his labor and the state that wants to spend them. Roosevelt won the battle in 1933. He saved the system. But he changed the soul of the economy. He turned citizens into creditors of the state. And if you're a creditor, you're vulnerable. If the debtor decides not to pay, there's nothing you can do. As we stand on the edge of a new financial era, with debt levels higher than the Great Depression, we have to ask ourselves, are we ready for the next order? Are we ready for the day when the app on our phone turns red and tells us that for the good of the nation, our savings have been revalued? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The men in Washington in 1933 wore fedoras and smoked cigars. The men in Washington today wear suits and look at iPads. But the logic is the same. When the crisis gets bad enough, the rules go out the window. The gold confiscation was a heist. But it was a legal heist. Approved by the Supreme Court. Applauded by newspapers. And that's the scariest kind of heist. Because there's no police to call when the government is taking your money. The only defense is memory. The only defense is knowing what happened, so we can see it coming when it happens again. Your grandfather might have buried his gold in the garden. He might have been called a criminal. A hoarder. But looking back now, with the dollar having lost 99 of its value since then, maybe he wasn't the criminal. Maybe he was the smartest man in the room. This is the Untold History Tales channel. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the curve. Because when the history books are written, you'll want to be among the few who saw it coming.